really great to be here today. Got lots of things to talk about today in a pretty short period of time. And I think I'll just start out and talk about, what exactly autism is. It's a developmental disorder. It's a very, very big continuum. Now, the thing is, when does something of just normal variation become an abnormality? For example, people with bipolar have more siblings in creative careers, and people with autism have more relatives in technical careers. If we got rid of all of the genetics that makes autism, well, you wouldn't even have any computers. You wouldn't have any electricity. I mean, who do you think made the first stone spear? It wasn't the social yakety-yaks around the campfire, that's for sure. See, the thing is a little bit of these traits can provide an advantage. You get too much of the trait, then you get a disadvantage. You see, that's the problem. It isn't like having tuberculosis where you either have it or you don't. I just got back from Australia and I had to check off on the customs form whether or not it had tuberculosis. And I could definitely say no. You see, that is something that's absolutely definitive. Now, the thing is, what would happen to little Albert today? Well, Dr. Einstein had no speech until age 3. He would have been diagnosed autistic in a lot of school systems. What would happen to him? It makes me really, really worried. Fortunately, somebody let him develop his abilities. I think a job at the patent office was a good thing because he got exposed to lots and lots of new ideas. What about Steve Jobs? Yep, he was a loner. He brought snakes to school. He didn't have any friends. And one of the things that fixed him, that really helped him, was the local kids' computer club. When he was in high school, he got in to do computers with other students, and this really helped him because the only place I had friends was where there was shared interests. Okay, autism is a very, very big spectrum. It's not precise. It's a behavioral profile. You see, and it varies all the way from someone like Einstein, Silicon Valley. Half of Silicon Valley's got a bit of the spectrum. They tend to avoid the labels. And then you've got, on the other end of the spectrum, somebody very, very severe. You see, it's a huge spectrum. It's a much bigger spectrum than something like dyslexia. Now, when I worked on my book, The Autistic Brain, and we looked at the history of diagnosis, it was kind of shocking how much things have changed. Nobody's changing the diagnosis of tuberculosis. It's still pretty much the same. Yes, there's resistant strains now we got to worry about, but it's still tuberculosis. Where in 1950 and 1970, they blamed mothers, the psychoanalytic approach. Then in 52, they were mixing up autism with schizophrenia. This is the American Psychiatric Association. You see, the problem is these labels are half science, and the other half is doctors squabbling around conference room tables. And 1968, they just mentioned autism. It just sort of barely got mentioned. And then in 1980, they finally came up with a definite diagnosis where you had to have speech delay and other, obviously, autistic behaviors. In 1987, they added PDD-NOS, pervasive developmental disorder not otherwise specified. Well, what is that? 1994, they added Asperger's, where now if you're just a geek and a nerd and you're socially awkward, you now get an autism diagnosis because you no longer had to have speech delay. Well, now in 2013, they decided to take out the Asperger's, and now the whole thing is very muddied because what about the speech delay and the abnormal language? Well, that's all kind of blurred now. Then they started a new diagnosis called social communication disorder, and they're trying to say that's not autism. Well, what do you think the core problem is in autism? It's socially awkward. It's sort of like you take out some social circuits in the brain, you end up with geek circuits to do all the fun geek stuff. Now, the genetics is complicated. It's not a simple thing. Lots of little tiny code variations involved with the DNA that's involved with the brain development. It's complicated. What people don't realize is only 2% or less of the DNA actually codes for proteins, makes the animal. What does the rest of the DNA do? Well, when I was getting my PhD at the University of Illinois, they used to think non-coding DNA was rubbish or junk DNA. No, it's probably the operating system. It tells the other DNA what to do. So when you fold the genome all up, coding DNA comes against non-coding DNA in some unknown pattern. And in my work with animals, I've got a new edition now of my book, Genetics and the Behavior of Domestic Animals. It's a textbook. If it sells 1,000 copies, that's a bestseller for a textbook. And one of the first things in the first edition we looked at was how traits are linked. Now, the famous experiments by the Russian scientist Belyaev. And he wanted to breed foxes that wouldn't bite your hand off. So they selected foxes to be gentle, and they ended up with a black and white border collie fox dog. You see, coat color was linked to temperament. Yeah, traits are linked. Overselect for a single trait, you're going to have a lot of problems. And this article in Science and Nature, there were a bunch of articles on the ENCODE project. You know, somehow maybe there's some kind of mathematical relationship on how the operating system works. Okay, all you Aspie hackers out there, I challenge you. The ultimate hack is the non-coding DNA. I mean, why do you want to mess around with people's Visa cards and things like that when you can hack DNA? A lot more interesting and a lot more valuable. But the problem is, we don't really know how the operating system works. Okay, I like to look at variation in personality traits, sort of like a music mixing board or an audio mixing board. You know, you can make anxiety a little less, you can make anxiety a little more, you can make depression a little less, you can make visual thinking more or less, mathematical thinking more or less. These things are on a continuum. See, what the problem with top-down verbal thinking is once someone gets labeled autistic, there's a tendency sometimes to overprotect. You know, like say, oh, well, little Jimmy, you know, he's got Asperger's or autism. He doesn't have to order his food in the restaurants. I go, oh, yes, he does. And that's the kind of stuff that my mother always had me doing. I had to do stuff. She had me be a little hostess at her cocktail parties, so I'd learn social skills. Really important stuff like that. Now, being a visual thinker was a really big asset in my work designing equipment. And this is actually a curved round crowding pen going up to the chute to go in one of the beef packing plants that I worked on. And when I design something, I can test run it in my mind. Now, if you want to see how this works, you can go on YouTube. I have a video called Beef Plant Video Tour with Temple Grandin. Then you can see how it works. Now, people always ask me, do the cattle know they're going to get slaughtered? Well, I had to answer that question. And I found they behave the same way at the slaughter plant as they do in the veterinary chute. Yes, there's some stress, but if they knew they were going to die, they should be jumping out, and they usually are not doing that. Okay, I used to joke around that I had a huge visual thinking circuit, a big graphic circuit in my brain. And it turns out that I do have a pretty big circuit in my brain for visual thinking. This goes all the way back into the visual cortex. It's probably in the top 25%. And when you're a weird nerd and you're trying to get your business started, I found nobody wanted to talk to me. But when I showed them my drawings, they went, oh, you did that? Well, then I got respect. You see, I started out my business freelance, one little project at a time. And one of my big concerns, where you've got kids labeled dyslexic, they're labeled ADHD, they're labeled mildly autistic, Asperger's, is I'm seeing too many smart kids that are way less severe than me, and they're not going anywhere. They're getting addicted to video games. They haven't learned job skills. Around age 12, boy, I wish the paper routes were around. Well, let's find a substitute for paper routes, things like walking dogs for the neighbors. How about working on a neighborhood website, something like that? They've got to learn how to do work. And there's a scene in the HBO movie where I walk up to the head of the farmer ranchman and I get his card. I actually did that. You know, I started out one little freelance article at a time, one little project at a time, building up a freelance business. In fact, I know a lot of people out in the meat industry that are mildly on the autism spectrum in good jobs, like they run the maintenance engineering shop at a large plant. Start out entry level, then work up. I know 2 people that run metal fabrication companies, and they run them. They own the companies. People that do IT for major corporations. You see, as I go back and forth between the livestock world and the autism world, I'm just seeing too many kids kind of getting overprotected. You know, you got to get them out. You got to get them out doing things. And when I was 15, I didn't want to go to my aunt's ranch. My mother said, well, you could go for a week or 2, or you can go all summer. But not going was not going to be an option. They weren't going to let me become a recluse in my room. Well, and this is another brain scan that was done in 2010, and what the blue part shows is basically water, cerebral spinal fluid. My left parietal area is pretty well trashed out. That kind of wrecked the math department. I did just fine with elementary school math, and I hit a wall at algebra. So how did I get through college? Well, back in '67, the fad at the time was finite math. That was sort of the big fad everybody was doing. Probabilities, matrices, and statistics. And with 10,000 hours of tutoring, I managed to get through that. That absolutely saved me. I'm getting worried today, with all this emphasis on STEM, that my kind of mind's going to get locked out. You know, but I'm going to show you where you need my kind of mind. You know, as I've said in my previous TED talk, world needs all kinds of minds, and they can work together and complement each other. Well, back in '68, I had access to the same computer that Bill Gates had access. Malcolm Gladwell uses this example in his book Outliers. You know, and he basically said, well, if you have enough access to the education and enough time to practice, everyone can become an expert. I wanted to learn how to program the computer, but I couldn't do it. I just couldn't do it. And one of the things I want to emphasize is build on the kids' area of strength. When you get kids with different labels, they tend to have uneven skills. Build on the strength. My ability in art was always encouraged. You know, if I hadn't had art and sewing when I was in school, I would have gone nowhere. But I was encouraged to do lots of different kinds of art. And I just got back from Quebec. And in Quebec, I just found out that art, dance, and theater all required classes up there. You know, the French culture seems to value that. And let's look at Steve Jobs. Steve Jobs was an artist. He wasn't an engineer. He was an artist. And you know what turned him on when he was in college, even though he dropped out? Calligraphy. He was fascinated with calligraphy. And that's why computers have nice fonts. You know, it was the art mind that designed the user interface on every single smartphone that there is. It was not an engineer. Engineers have to make it work. See, this is where you have to have the 2 kinds of minds working together. And I'm going to give you some other examples of where my kind of mind that can't do algebra is needed. This is one of my most important slides. I am a photorealistic visual thinker, what's called an object visualizer. Everything I think about is in a photorealistic picture. Now, when I was young, I didn't know that other people didn't think this way. I thought everybody was a visual thinker. You know, and then gradually I learned that other people think differently than I think. Kinds of jobs I'm good at is industrial design. There's a whole college major in industrial design. People that are visual thinkers are very good at things like fixing cars and skilled trades. I think one of the worst things the schools have done is taking out all the skilled trades classes. Absolutely the worst. You know, you've got people, the young people today, they don't cook, they don't sew. I was sewing up a rip in some clothing last night, and I was wondering if a young person even knew how to use a needle and thread. They've never had to do those things. Woodworking, welding. Okay, I talked about the guys that own the 2 metal fabrication shops. That was welding. But the other thing about doing those hands-on classes is they teach practical problem solving. You know, real projects don't always work out just the way you want them to work out. You know, then you make a mistake or you don't have some of the materials. Can you figure out how to substitute another material? That's resourcefulness. And then you have the pattern thinker, the spatial visualizer. These are the kids that are going to ace all the math stuff. But the ones that are really brilliant in math often have trouble with reading. And I'm seeing some very bad situations where I see a kid who's a little brilliant mathematician in the 3rd grade, and they're making him do that baby math over and over again. Well, you'll just end up with a behavior problem. If he can do the high school math, let him do the high school math. Also, we got to get a lot more into what are they going to do when they grow up. And in my Autistic Brain book, I discuss all these different kinds of minds. Then you got the verbal facts thinker. These guys, they're very good with anything with words. They understand words. And obviously, most so-called normal people are mixtures of these different kinds of thinking. Now, we need to have evidence today that this is not just some nonsense that I've made up. And the Autistic Brain book has got all the references for the evidence of the 2 types of visual thinking. You know, that there's the object visualizer and then the more where you are in space. See, in your brain, you got circuits for what is something. That's my kind of mind. Another kind of circuit is where is something. Where are you located in space? That's the mathematician mind. And there's also some PET scan studies that show that this actually is real. And I found these studies while surfing one night on the internet, 2 o'clock in the morning. I found these studies. They were kind of hidden away. You know, there's sort of this bias that everybody is exactly the same. Now, there's a big amount of brain plasticity. There's a big bunch of people in the middle range. Yeah, you practice enough, you can get really good at a lot of different things. I wasn't very good at public speaking to start with, and I walked out of my first graduate school talk. You know, I think I've come a little bit of a ways since then. But then there's other things where it'd be better off just to work on developing the strengths. You know, there's 2 ways to do the math. There's the verbal way, and there's the more geometric way. Some of these kids that are really smart at this stuff, they don't show their work. Well, I think people need to understand they think differently. We need to take some precautions against cheating, but once we've done that, then accept the fact that they think differently. Now, I want to give you a little glimpse into the mind of the mathematician. This is not my mind. That praying mantis is made out of a single sheet of folded paper. No cuts, no tape. In the background is the folding pattern. That certainly is not my mind. And there are some beautiful origami stars some kids gave me. I always like to show my drawings off because when you're a weird nerd, I learned that you got to sell your work rather than yourself during an interview. We got to figure out ways to short circuit that process. And you never know where you might meet the person that will open the door, so your portfolio better be on your phone. Here's gorgeous artwork that Jessie Park did. She's more at the moderate level. This is a good example of developing talent and getting a person to do work other people want. She was obsessed with electric blanket controls. Well, nobody wants that for artwork. They had to get her off that. And here's some beautiful artwork that another person on the autism spectrum at the moderate level is making. And both of these artworks are being sold professionally. All right, what's this mess? Okay, gearheads out there. Okay, engineers. This is the reason why you need us art minds that can't do algebra. What's left there is something you don't want to get very close to. It's the remains of the Fukushima nuclear power plant. And when I found out why this burned up, why they had, breach of containment, radioactivity going into the ocean, total mess. How did this happen? So I read lots and lots and lots of articles. I spent a lot of time on the plane reading. I'd go buy 3 newspapers, and I would read everything about it. And I pieced together what happened. They made a mistake that to a visual thinker is so elementary. I couldn't believe that they had made this mistake. Well, when you scram a reactor and you shove the control rods back in, it almost turns it off. But it gets hot. And you've got to have an emergency cooling pump to keep water going through it. Well, they put all that equipment and the generators that run that equipment in a basement that was not waterproof. All right, so what do you think happened? Diesels do not run underwater. That's what happened. That's a mistake I would never, ever make. And, I go, wait a minute, you got to have some submarine doors here that you crank shut. You're going to need some sump pumps if the water's leaking, in there. Well, if they'd had those simple things I understand, things I think you understand, wouldn't have had this problem. We really do need all kinds of minds. Now, in my first work with cattle, I noticed that they were afraid of a lot of visual detail, like, for example, this flag waving. Okay, animals notice detail. You see, an animal's world is sensory-based, it's not word-based. And I noticed they notice all kinds of detail in the environment and refuse to walk through a chute. And if I got rid of all these little distractions, then they would, go right through the chute. Now, how many people there noticed that animal was locked onto that sunbeam like radar? Okay, you see, that's being attentive to visual detail. Getting back to the slaughterhouse, I found if I got rid of stuff like that, I'd walk right in the slaughterhouse. It's amazing. I can go in a meat plant and do what I call lights and cardboard. And I get a portable light on a long extension cord where I can light up a dark chute entrance. Then I get cardboard to cover up something that might be making a shadow like that. It works. It's amazing. Lights and cardboard. It really does work. Well, of course, some of my earlier work was making an optical illusion room when I was in high school. And my teachers didn't tell me how to make it. They wanted me to figure it out for myself. And that's what I had to do. It wasn't easy. Animals' world's sensory-based. So when they remember something, it's a picture. Let's say an animal gets afraid of something. Okay, like there was a horse that was terrified of black cowboy hats. White cowboy hats were fine, but black cowboy hats were really scary. Didn't want to be anywhere near black cowboy hats. In human beings, language covers up sensory-based thinking. There's a type of Alzheimer's, whereas the language parts of the brain are trashed, artwork like this comes out. Or Van Gogh was painting Starry Night and putting swirls in there, and he didn't realize he was doing mathematics. The mathematicians got a hold of this. This is an important slide. And it's true for both a lot of people on the autism spectrum. It's true for me. It's also true for animals. Bottom-up thinking. Everything is learned by specific examples. And I was just at a really nice bookstore last night, and I noticed a book they had out there about a genius dog, a border collie that learned all these words. And when they trained that dog, it was all specific examples, everything specific examples. They had to teach her categories for different types of toys. Okay, balls versus sticks or something like that. That's done by specific example. You want to teach a kid with autism things like up and down. You need to use 7 or 8 different specific examples. Otherwise, they might think up just meant up the stairs. No, the kite went up in the air. The cup was put up on the shelf. I picked up the paperclip. You've got to use a bunch of different specific examples. Everything is learned by specific examples, and specific examples are put into categories. That's how my mind works. It's also associative, not linear. It's associative thinking. So if I see in my mind the picture of United Concourse B, I was just in there the other day, my mind can either go into a glass structure category or an airport category. You see, my mind works like Google's search engine. And I'm going to show you a brain circuit that I've got that's going to explain that. And there's no generalized pictures of any of these things. It's all specific. It's what's called bottom-up thinking. We need a lot more bottom-up thinking in government policy. That's something we really need. We got people coming right out of college with a degree in something like political science or public administration, and they're going right into politics or lobbying. But they have no practical experience with any of the stuff that they're legislating or lobbying about. And I think it is a real problem. That's why we've got so many bad problems today. Okay, glass structure category. Go through those quick. How about airport category? Yeah, they're all specific. And, Atlanta, big security lines. Okay, all right. And when I asked a physics professor one time to think about a church steeple, instead of getting specific ones the way I do, he got pictures of motion of people praying and singing and swaying. I go, oh, wow, trippy. That's not my mind. Now, animals make categories. Let me show you one that found in the cattle industry. Okay, we got a man on a horse. The cattle will get real close to the man on the horse. They feel comfortable with the man on the horse. But when the guy gets off the horse and is on foot, the cat will run away. But think about it. Man on a horse is a different picture than man on the ground. You see, you've got to train them to both. Animal thinking is extremely specific, and I talk about this in my book, Animals in Translation. How do we categorize a problem when we're troubleshooting? Is there something wrong with equipment or something wrong with training? Or are you working with a kid? Is it a biology problem, like sensory oversensitivity? Or is it a behavior problem, like frustration because they can't talk, or I want to get out of doing something, or I want to get attention? I find categorizing problems really easy, but if you want to be good at troubleshooting, you need to be able to categorize things. Here are the lucky geeks. They got to land the Mars rover on Mars. But I'm seeing the younger versions of too many of these kinds of guys getting addicted to video games, and I'm hearing this story, well, I can't get him out of the basement. He's 18, I can't get him out of the bedroom. No, they weren't going to let me become a recluse in my room. This is what makes me crazy, because I've been out to Silicon Valley. I've been to Disney Imagineering, I've been to Google, I've been to Pixar, I've been to a whole lot of different places. Oh, it's all full of people mildly on the autism spectrum. You know, all kinds of people there. Some of them older people. Now, where a diagnosis later in life can be helpful is in understanding relationships. But when we're dealing with these more milder people on the job front, I'm seeing them get held back, not learning any work skills, kind of overprotecting some of these kids. What you got to do is you got to stretch them. You got to push them just outside their comfort zone. Don't chuck them in the deep end of the pool. Don't give them sudden surprises. But if you don't stretch them, they don't develop. I was more interested in looking at pictures of things than pictures of people. But we need people interested in things. After all, Tesla, who invented the power plant, probably was autistic. You got to stretch them. Mentors. I had a fantastic science teacher. You know, you got to expose kids to interesting things to get them interested in interesting things. If I hadn't been exposed to an optical illusion room, I would not have gotten interested in it. You know, sort of imagine their heads got like an empty internet, and you got to fill it up full of web pages. You got to get out there and show them interesting stuff. Kids today don't just play together and make up their own games. You know, you got to learn how to negotiate. When I was a little kid, we did lots of stuff with turn taking. These kids have got to learn how to take turns. Wait and take your turn. My ability in art was always encouraged. We need to get a lot more emphasis on building up areas of strength. And then you go, well, what about the school requirements? I'll tell you right now, there's a lot of industries with no barrier of entry. Oh, oil industry screaming for certified welders right now. You want to get to run 5 oil rigs. You're a really nice 26-year-old guy that likes to drink Coke in his hotel room instead of getting blasted on beer, and you do a job for like 7 or 8 years, you'll run 5 oil rigs. I mean, there's a lot of industries out there where there's absolutely no barrier of entry. Oh, the computer field is definitely one of those industries. You show off a good portfolio of all your programming, you're in. You know, industrial design, all kinds of stuff like that. Okay, great online resources, Khan Academy, Udacity, free programming classes. If that kid wants to spend 8 hours a day learning programming, he can do that. Wants to learn how to make video games. Code Academy. I didn't put down Code Academy. Another free programming. Coursera. Free courses in every field. Lots of humanities classes. But you've got to do that as a college course. You know, it's not at your own pace. There's a lot of great free stuff on the web. Now, there's one of my designs in Google SketchUp. SketchUp is free software. Well, let's get kids together that are kind of different and have them in a SketchUp club. And then they can get to print their creations on a 3D printer, which makes their creation out of plastic resin. Well, 3D printer is a mechanical device. This is where electronic interfaces with the real physical. And you don't do things right, it'll print you a pile of goo rather than printing your thing. You know, it is interacting with the real world. You know, but getting back to making things, I was very disturbed today to look in the newspaper, the Chicago Tribune today, and they had Estes model rockets already pre-made. I was an Estes model rocketer when I was a kid, but we had to build our own rockets. We had to make them. You just got cardboard tubes and balsa wood, and you had to build them. Here's some other great online science projects. When I was in high school, not doing much studying, I was learning lots of work skills. You know, I decorated our ski-tow house up really nice. By the time I got out of college, I had done a ton of work skills stuff. Where are we going to find mentors? Oh, there's lots of retired people that could mentor some of these kids that are kind of different. I'm really concerned our educational system's failing to stimulate some of the, especially the more art type of thinkers like me. Really worried about it, that we're going to just get marginalized. You know, but the thing is, the mathematician minds need us. Let's look at another big, gigantic engineering mistake. Airbags that killed babies and young children. Well, there's no way I would have made that mistake. That was an example of blindly following a specification that the airbag had to restrain an adult man with no seatbelt. Well, you know, you better do up your seatbelt, guy, because an airbag strong enough for that's going to kill little kids. Wouldn't have made that mistake either. You know, already discussed about the problems of taking out the hands-on classes. This is the stuff that saved me. Horses, model rockets, and electronics lab. Those are the only places I was not teased. The bullying stuff has really gotten out of hand. What people are doing on Facebook, I mean, 12-year-old girls bullied another girl, wrote horrible things on Facebook to the point where she jumped off an old abandoned cement plant and killed herself. You know, that's like completely terrible. Last night on the TV, people thought it was funny to take other people's little kids' pictures and put them up on a fake Facebook page and make fun of them. You know, that's gotten worse on some of this teasing stuff, not better. You know, we need people in this country that can get out there and do real stuff. You know, and that means involving making things. Businesses can't find enough mechanics. They can't find enough high-level programmers. There's a lot of places out there where there's shortages of jobs. I'm just saying too many talented, quirky kids, I'd rather call them mild Asperger's that, just kind of going nowhere. You know, they're playing video games and collecting a Social Security check, and they shouldn't be. And then I go out to the meat industry world, and here's the guy that came out of the trailer park, and he's not doing that. He is running the maintenance shop. Now, people in the trailer park are going to have a terrible time with the more severe cases of autism. They're going to end up just going absolutely nowhere. See, this is the problem you have with autism. It's such a big spectrum. But, you know, those ones, the real mild ones, they had to work. Okay, you sell your work and not yourself. Also, I learned that I had to ask my boss for specific goals. When I worked for the Farm and Ranchman magazine, I knew I had to do a certain amount of articles. There were certain things I had to cover. There were certain meetings I always had to cover, certain livestock shows I had to cover. Then I was free to do some features. It was clear, like, what I was supposed to produce. And when there's a mistake, the boss cannot be vague. Like, for example, let's say we're training somebody to be a museum tour guide. You've got to demonstrate the correct distance. You can't just say, oh, well, you're too aggressive with the patrons. You've got to say, well, watch Susie, how she does it. You've got to demonstrate the correct greeting. It's just like coaching an actor in a play. That's how you've got to do it. Now, I want to discuss problems with sensory. You know, sound sensitivity, visual sensitivity problems. These are things that happen in conjunction with a lot of different labels, sensory processing problems. And they can range from being a nuisance to being something that really is very, very debilitating. When I was a child and the school bell went off, it hurt my ears. We used to go on this ferry boat, and when the horn blew, I just flung myself down on the deck, started screaming because it hurt my ears. Another problem I had is I had problems hearing hard consonant sounds. Like if you said rat, cat, or bat. A very hard time differentiating those. So my speech teacher, when she worked with me when I was very young, she'd slow down and she'd enunciate her hard consonant sounds. She'd say cup, and then she'd say cuppa. She'd go back and forth. And I was the kind of kid that in the 50s used to just get put in an institution, because when I was 3 years old, I had absolutely no language at all. Okay, done some brain scanning with Walter Snyder at the University of Pittsburgh, and this is a circuit for speak what you hear. The speak what you hear circuit. This type of scanning can track fiber bundles in the brain. They're sort of like cable bundles that connect up all the different parts of the brain. Now that is a cable bundle that goes from the language motor area down to the visual cortex for speak what you see. This is mine. And all those different bushes, you can see there that they've actually cut off the ends of the bushes because they go all over the brain. And basically the way my mind works is I have a language-based visual search engine. In other words, you can put keywords in and it pulls up all kinds of other, all kinds of pictures. Now the thing is, there's still a continuum here. You can see that the normal circuit has got a few bushes on it. At what point do extra bushes become an abnormality? Okay, there's no black and white dividing line. Now the reason why this scanner was developed was it's all funded by the Defense Department to look for head injuries in veterans. Now if you have a head injury, these bundles will be ripped and they look like spaghetti bundles where you twist it and break half of them. And it's like, oh man, you go, this guy's in trouble. But when it's a developmental abnormality, you know, at what point are more bushes abnormal? It's not clearly black and white. Now, the price I paid for all those bushes, which I think have a lot to do with visual thinking, I have less bandwidth for speak what I see. I had trouble getting my speech out. Getting speech out, that was really, really, really hard. But I had bandwidth. Okay, getting back to the Malcolm Gladwell thing. Well, I got a few fibers there, so they were able to, you know, maybe expand those, and I could do, I finally learned how to talk. Another problem that happens lots of times in autism is attention-shifting slowness. It takes longer to shift back and forth. And this is why I didn't want the photographers down there in front of me, because, okay, I see them move down there, shifts my attention, and then I just lose my train of thought. Some kids, when they go to read, the print will jiggle on the page. And this doesn't explain all reading problems. Maybe it only explains 10% of reading problems. But I'm finding that about 1 out of 50, the so-called normal population, has this problem. See, in the back of your head, you got circuits for shape, color, and motion. They got to work together. Something's wrong with how those circuits work together. Sometimes some very simple treatments will work for this. Things like pale pastel paper. Get away from fluorescent lights. These are the kids that can't tolerate 60-cycle old-fashioned type fluorescent lights. Things like a checkerboard pattern on the floor will drive them crazy because they can kind of see it doing this. Things colored lenses sometimes help some of these kids. Well, there's my head. All right, that is the connectome. Hopefully there's some gray matter in the space there, I hope. But what this shows is the white matter circuits that connect up different brain departments. And this new scanning technology, they can actually dissect out the cable bundles that do the different things. Because with this technology, you can tell, do two myelinated fibers cross, or are they an intersection that's connected? You know, bridges versus intersections. It can tell the difference. Well, there's the connectome without the rest of the head. And some other scan findings show that my fear center, my amygdala, was much bigger than normal. Well, and that's been helped now with antidepressants. There's a lot of visual thinkers. I know visual thinking designers. They're not autistic, but a little bit of Prozac in the morning really helps. I've been taking antidepressants for about over 30 years. They stopped my constant panic attacks. You know, in the movie, that showed me in my 20s. And I was eating all that yogurt and Jell-O. And the reason why I was eating the yogurt and Jell-O is I had colitis. And when I went on the antidepressants, the colitis kind of got cured. It made the colitis stop. But you've got to use really low doses of antidepressants. Otherwise, you're going to have problems. Okay, here are some accommodations for the workplace. Getting rid of 60-cycle fluorescent lights. I need a quiet place to work. There's some individuals may need frequent breaks. Also, no sudden surprises in work routine. And I still can't stand scratchy clothes. And I have found that some cotton itches and other cotton does not itch, and I really don't know why. Now, I had a terrible time in a regular large high school, and I was kicked out for fighting in 9th grade, for throwing a book at a girl who was bullying me. She called me a retard. And then I went away to special boarding school for gifted kids with emotional problems. You got to remember, this is 60s. This is 60s. You got to remember that. And I got in some big, serious fist fights, and they took horseback riding away for a while. I still could clean the horse barn, but I just couldn't ride them. And I switched from anger to crying. It's okay for geeks to cry. It's okay for boys to cry. NASA space scientists cried when they shut down the space shuttle, and they did it on 60 Minutes. You know, you can go and look that up. You know, looking at some of these things, we got to get a lot more resourceful on how we deal with these kids. You know, let's think about these girls that wrote the awful things on that Facebook page like drink bleach and die. That was one of the things they wrote on this other girl that commits suicide. That's the printable stuff. The other stuff they wrote is not repeatable. Okay, so they're putting a felony charge on these girls. A better thing to have done, they're 12 and 13 years old, a better thing to have done would be to pull them into a big meeting, maybe with the judge, the prosecutor, the police, school, parents, you know, religion, you know, the priest or rabbi or whatever, all together, and the prosecutor's there saying, well, I can sign this form, you know, wrapping you with a felony, or you are banned from social media until you're 18, and you're going to be doing a lot of community service, especially with people that have been bullied. And they have that would be a more constructive way. That would be the take a community way, using a community to work with them. And I've read some interesting stuff on getting, you know, gangs cleaned up and stuff by taking this kind of approach. Okay, you know, now you have a family member with severe autism. You see, this is the problem. If you have very severe autism, even with good treatment, you may not be able to do normal activities. You can't go to a football game. You can't go to the supermarket without there being a tantrum from sensory overload. That's really stressful for the family. You know, and we've got to get supports for those families. One of the things we've got to do, and we need to do this in everything, is getting people out of their silos. You know, one of the problems with the government agencies, they don't communicate with each other. People have got to get to where they start communicating with each other. And then I got to show some pictures of this because we're building a new therapeutic riding center at CSU. We'll show that. And there's a website up there because we got to raise the money to build this. And because the states have cut back all the budgets now for every state college everywhere. And since I'm an ag, this state right here cut all the budget for Future Farmers of America program, which is an ag program for high school kids, which is just terrible. Because for some of these kids that are kind of quirky and different, that's the greatest program. Learn how to fix tractors, learn how to weld, you know, and everyone needs to eat. Okay, now we've got enough time here to do questions. I'm supposed to save 15 minutes for questions, and I can go until 4 minutes after 12 because I'm allowed exactly 1 hour. Okay, they've got, oh, that's the mic you're going to use? I didn't realize that mic was the one you were going to use. Well, I've got a roving mic. Now, I can't see out here very well, but hopefully, oh, they're going to turn the house lights up. Good, good. I think somebody's over here, because I would definitely like to do a few questions. Okay, hopefully you can get it to somebody. Yeah, because I can't see. Okay, good. Hello?
As an animal lover, I'd like to thank you for all your work with the humane treatment of animals. I really appreciate that.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much.
And on a rather simplistic level, I, as an animal lover, I do things like buying cage-free eggs. And then I was devastated to hear someone on TV the other day say, well, if you buy those eggs, that sounds really good on the carton, but it really isn't so.
It depends upon how the cage-free eggs are done.
What?
You know, it depends how they are done.
Exactly.
You see,
now.
This is the problem. On a lot of things, you know, what's really going on in the world is somewhere in the middle. What I think is going to happen in ag is you're going to have things like, you know, cage-free eggs. Cage-free eggs, to really do them right, they are going to be more expensive. Now, what are we going to do about our people that are working at minimum wage that have to buy the cheapest eggs for their kids? All right, let's go to a large-scale commercial. I'm not going to use that buzzword, factory farms, that was going to provide some amenities for the chickens. Like, for example, they can walk at full height and walk in a normal posture. What do chickens want? They want a private place to lay their eggs. You know, they don't like to do that out in the open. Perching, scratching place. It's called a colony house or a colony cage. That probably would be a sensible alternative for, you know, large-scale commercial eggs. And then for the cage-free eggs, they'll work. Where they don't work is where you try to get the stocking densities too high, and then you end up with a big dust mess. They do work fine at lower stocking densities, but then you have to have maybe 5 times more buildings than you would have for you know, large-scale commercial. You see, things aren't quite so simple sometimes. You get people pro and con on an issue, and they try to oversimplify it. My book, Animals Make Us Human, actually discusses these issues. And it is for sale in the bookstore. Okay, right here. Just say it real loud and quickly, and I'll repeat it. Okay, it's a calico mixed cat. Tortoiseshell and calico. We got some weird genetics there. You might be interested in my Genetics and the Behavior of Domestic Animals book. The cat gets panic attacks?
She's very easily overstimulated. I can't tell what is overstimulating her and what isn't. You have to be so careful.
Okay, the thing is, now this also ties into some autism stuff. You got a cat that gets overstimulated, and what does it do when it gets overstimulated?
She can, for no apparent reason to me, I can be holding her and she'll suddenly scream and literally
I think
jump.
you've got a psychomotor epilepsy there.
Really? Are you
Yeah,
serious?
and you can also get this in some very, very, very severe cases of autism, where you get a sudden, you know, jump up and knock the wall out.
Well, she's not that severe, but she will cry and she will jump straight up in the air, and God help you if her claws are near you.
Yeah, but that's probably, you see, when it comes on like a switch.
Right.
And this can happen in some people, especially nonverbal individuals with autism. You get, it's where they're not in a noisy store. They're in a quiet place. You know, now if they're having a meltdown in the middle of Walmart, that is just plain sensory overload. In fact, that's a really good way to tell if someone on the spectrum is really sensitive. But when it's something out of the blue like this, and the cat's in a quiet place and then just does that, that's probably a psychomotor epilepsy that is treatable with standard epilepsy drugs used for humans. You need to find a veterinarian that's skilled in using those drugs in your area. Also, there's a book by Karen Overall. It's a little outdated now, but it's available on Amazon on medications for animals. Karen Overall, spelled like overalls. I don't know if she's updated it or not, but that sounds like a typical psychomotor epilepsy. And if you get something like that similar in a nonverbal person, it's treatable with epilepsy drugs.
Thank you so much.
Temple? Oh, Dr. Grandin? Hi, I'm over here.
Okay, I can't tell which way the sound's coming from.
Anyway, I'd like to talk more about the parent hovering over an autistic child.
Okay, good.
I'm trying to find a reasonable balance for my 17-year-old daughter. I wanted to know, do I go get her a job? Does she get her something?
Oh, you need to grease the job. You need to grease the skids some. My mother, when I was 13, saw a house where a lady did freelance sewing out of her home, just in the neighborhood, and she went in, talked to the lady, explained the situation. I now had a little volunteer job 2 afternoons a week, taking apart dresses and hemming them. And she liked me so much she started paying me. You know, my mother set up the ranch stuff. No, you need to set up some things for your 17-year-old daughter. Okay, first of all, what is she good at? This is a subject that I really like to talk about. What's she good at?
I'm actually struggling with that, but she goes to a regular high school. And
What is her best class?
She loves the anime club.
Anime club, well, first of all, we need to get the art ability more broadened.
Okay. She's taking graphic design in
She's
school
taking
as
graphic
well.
design.
The second level, so she's already passed the first level.
So she's really good at art stuff. Well, how about working on a neighborhood newsletter? How about working on...
She is actually interested in doing yearbook.
Okay, good. Let's encourage all that kind of stuff. But if she hasn't had any job at all, you need to set up some job. It could be something like you know, helping at the farmer's market every weekend. You help set the tents up. Doing something in the park with some children's program, or, you know, just find stuff in the neighborhood. And it can be volunteer stuff. That's fine. But she needs the discipline of a job. Okay, every Saturday afternoon at 2, you're going to help old Mrs. Jones get her groceries. You just set up stuff like that.
Okay. Okay. Thank you.
Hello, I was wondering how you feel about mainstreaming of all different kinds of minds in the same room. Do you think that?
Oh, it all depends upon the particular situation.
Right, but do you
don't get too top-down thinking on that.
Right.
That's something that gets a lot more specific situation. Now, I generally, with little kids, want to see them mainstreamed into a normal classroom. But let's go back to the little math genius. Well,
right,
if he can do college math in 3rd grade, you get a laptop loaded with college math software, and you bring it down to the 3rd grade classroom, because I want the social of the 3rd grade. But you don't make him do the baby math.
Right. So different minds should be able to be trained in different ways. And sometimes in the same room.
Oh, definitely they can be trained in the same room.
Sometimes in the same room, that is just frankly too much for the teacher.
And sometimes it doesn't work.
Right.
I talked to a very nice teacher who was in Colorado. I talked to her about half an hour about a student she had. It was a nonverbal student who made a lot of very disruptive noises. He was not able to participate in the class at all. That was not working. But then there's other situations where that nonverbal student may be working just fine. I also get asked all the time about public versus private schools and all that stuff. I said, I don't even want to hear that. I have found as I travel around that so many things depend on the particular people and the particular situation and how the parents and the teachers get along. Parents and teachers have got to be on the same wavelength. I cannot emphasize that enough. When I had a tantrum at school, the penalty was no television that night. That was the penalty. That was the rule, whether it happened at home or it happened at school. Now, I was not punished for flinging myself on the deck of the ferry when the horn went off, because that was strictly sensory overload. But we've got to get them on the same page. What I don't want to see, I'll tell you some things I don't want to see. I don't want to see a smart 4th grader that's fully verbal put into an autism class mostly with nonverbal clients. That I don't want to see, because then that Asperger ends up going nowhere when maybe he ought to go to Silicon Valley. See, this is the problem we've got with autism. When the kids are very little and you have speech delay, they all look the same. You work hard on early intervention, really, really hard. And any kid that's not talking at age 3 needs to be in an early intervention. The worst thing you can do with those kids is do nothing with them. And when I get down south where there's no services at all, I say you got to go to your church group, you got to go get students, you got to get someone to work with these kids. Okay, then when you work on them, you kind of diverge into kind of 3 groups. A real high-end group, maybe really math geniuses, art, stuff like that, but they have some skill deficiencies, could go into a high-level career. There's kind of a moderate group, and then there's a group that does not become verbal and is definitely going to have to live in a supported living situation. See, this is the problem. How did such a broad thing get all called autism? Because when they were 3, they all looked the same. When they're little kids. And then the Asperger's thing, that had no speech delay, but now they've merged that in, and now it's gotten even broader and more murky.
Hi.
Okay.
Yep, I'm right here.
Okay.
On your right.
You see, I can't tell where the sound's
I'm right in
coming
between the opening.
Okay.
My name is Mandy. I'm a behavior therapist and a graduate student in psychology. First, I just want to say thank you for all that you've done for the autism community. And so my question is, you've talked a lot about how being a visual and pattern thinker and developing that strength has been really helpful for you. So I'm wondering how and when you figured that out and how you were able to communicate that to other people in your life.
That's a really good question. My ability in visual thinking showed up around 3rd and 4th grade, 8 and 9 years old. You know, the drawings and pictures I made in kindergarten and first graders are just normal little kids' stuff. You know, sometimes these things show up earlier, but lots of times it doesn't show up that early. Now, first of all, the kids that are the visual thinkers like me usually are really good at art. That's your first tick off. Also going to be really good with Legos. Okay, then your math kids. They're going to be good at math. They also tend to be really good at Legos, but the little math heads have trouble with reading. That tends to be the pattern. And the word thinkers, they'll memorize every fact about whatever their favorite thing is, and that will show up. Sometimes they learn more than one language. There are some word math combinations that actually end up being good at programming. Now, in my book, The Autistic Brain, I fully discuss how the different kinds of minds work and provide scientific evidence for that.
I work with both children and adults with autism, and especially a lot of the adults were really upset by the changes in the DSM-5. And
these are adults that were Asperger's.
That had previous Asperger diagnoses. So I was just wondering your opinion on the changes, if you think that they're legit or if you think that there should be a separate Asperger's diagnosis.
Well, you see, the problem is that, the science is kind of showing a continuum. I think as more work's done with brain scans and things like that, start breaking autism up into component parts. You see, the problems with with the face recognition, eye contact, a lot of that social stuff, that's the core deficit. Then you get into things like what kind of thinker they are. That's something different. I think one of the reasons for doing it was politics. They were trying to narrow the spectrum. But I think all that's happened is it's muddied the waters as far as I can tell, because now it varies a lot by state, kind of what's happening. Some states are going to say it's got to be reevaluated. Others, they're just calling everything ASD, and it's sort of more of a big muddle. It's still kind of hard to tell exactly how it's going to work out. See, but the problem you've got here is that these diagnostic categories are half based on science, and the other half is doctors fighting around a conference room table in a secret meeting, and they got bashed for having secret meetings in hotel conference rooms. That's not how you're supposed to do science. As a scientist, it kind of rubs me the wrong way. The other thing I want to talk about, I'm getting concerned that too many kids, autism is becoming their whole sense of being, especially kids on the higher end of the spectrum. Now, people say to me, if I could snap my fingers and make myself not be autistic, would I do that? No, because I like the logical way I think. But working in animal science and doing my animal work, that comes first. I think it's important to have a profession and have a sense of identity where the autism just is not the first thing. I don't particularly like it when 9-year-olds walk up to me, all they want to talk about is their autism. That's all they want to talk about. No, I'd rather have them talk about they trained dogs or something like that. Or there was a girl that raised chickens for a 4-H project, or they like astronomy, or they like history or something. I get concerned where that becomes their total sense of being.
Dr. Grandin?
Well, I think we have time for 1 or 2 more quick ones because we'll be an hour. We got 1 minute before it's an hour is up.
Okay. Dr.
All right,
Grandin,
right quick right there.
Oh. That's okay.
Okay, basically what he's saying is that an unconventional path. Yes, that's right. I got in a lot of back doors. Okay, what happened with me, when my mother got remarried, that brought the ranch into the family, and I got to go out to my aunt's ranch. But then by the time I graduated from Franklin Pierce College, with a bachelor's in psychology, Mother had worked on setting up a lot of job stuff. The sewing job, the ranch, an internship at a hospital that had autistic and emotionally disturbed children. You remember this is 60s, and a internship at a research lab where I had to share a house with another lady. That stuff where she greased the skids and set it up. Then when I went out, but I also had been doing all these carpentry projects, and I'd sold a few signs. So when I went out to Arizona, I was in graduate school. Well, I went over to the Arizona State Fair and started painting signs for the carnival. I sort of had, you know, that entrepreneur. I really did walk up to the Arizona Farm and Ranchman guy, and I got his card, and I told him about my master's thesis. You see, and that started out one little article at a time. This stuff I did on my own. You know, started out just one little thing on its time. And you see, then you start writing, and you write about a subject, then you start building up a reputation in that subject. Also, I figured out by the time I graduated that certain people could open the door. That's something that I figured out. And you never know where those people are going to be. You know, that's what I did.
I'm so sorry. This is going to be our last question.
Okay. All right. I don't know where you're at. I can't see you. Okay. Right here, there's some of the black. All right, you can talk really loud. I'll try to repeat it.
I just.
Oh, there was one other. I didn't see it. See, I can't see what's. Sorry. Okay.
I just wanted to say first, like, I have ADHD, and I really admire you because you've come so far in you've studied animal cognition, that you've come up with all these great theories. It's exactly what I want to do. But my main question was that there's with artificial selection in dogs and things like that, there's those genetic traits that I know you've talked about.
Oh, there's really problems with dogs. The bulldog is like a deformed freakazoid.
Mm-hmm.
You want to see what a bulldog's supposed to look like, go to Google Images and type in Bulldog's Dilemma, and you'll see the 1938 version.
My question was, do you feel it's unethical to breed them, or do you think we can actually, I know there's studies saying we can learn from the problems that come with them?
Well, I don't think we should be breeding animals, either for pets or for food, where the animal has physical problems, like lameness. It's not able to have its babies naturally. It's got neurological problems. Bulldogs can't hardly walk. They have to have their puppies by cesarean. They can't breathe because I kept breeding for the smashed-in face. I have problems with that. You know, we shouldn't be breeding animals that are physically defective, either for food or for pets. And you over-select for single trait, you wreck your animal. And you'd probably be a fan of my behavior, second edition of Genetics of the Behavior of Domestic Animals. And well, it can be ordered from any bookstore.